Charles Taylor says our secular age is an age of authenticity. This is how he explains it. I'll read here. I mean, the understanding of life which emerges from the romantic expressivism of the late 18th century, that each one of us has his or her own way of realizing our humanity, and that it is important to find and live out one's own as against surrendering to conformity with a model imposed on us from outside by society of the previous generation or religious or political authority. Well, you can see, obviously, then this poses a serious challenge to Christian discipleship. So how do we guide Christians toward Jesus in an age of authenticity?
Well, I think that I think it's extremely important for Christian ministers to know, to actually unpack that statement. So, for example, if you talk to a teenager in your church that says, well, I think that if two people really love each other, I don't see why they can't have sex if they really, really love each other. So your first response is the right response, which is, well, let me show you how in the Bible that's not true. But the reason why the kid's eyes will probably glaze over as you're talking to him is because that statement he just made actually makes sense because that he's imbibed the deeper narratives. And that those narratives have come in through advertising, they've come in through songs, through art, through movies. I mean, the only heroic narrative we've got left in our culture is the individual looking inside, seeing who they want to be, and asserting that over and against everyone else in society. That's the heroic narrative. That's Elsa, that's Babe, that's that's everything. I mean, every cartoon, every sitcom. And so it goes in extraordinarily deep, and it's the idea is you have to be yourself. And I think actually Christian ministers have to, there are lots and lots of biblical responses to that, as well as common sense responses to it. And I actually think that the Christian ministers need to learn how to preach in a way that deconstructs the 3 or 4 or 5 constituent narratives, shows why these things don't work, so that when people hear them sung to them or in the movie, they immediately say, wait a minute, my preacher showed me why that's just not true. That's not how identity works. That's not how I decide. We figure out who we really are. And kids need to hear it too. So it's actually extraordinarily important, but not something that we have spent much time thinking about.
Well, what happens, though, when you buy into this progressive narrative and you run out of barriers to transgress? You've crossed all the boundaries. You've progressed through everything else. Like, what happens when you find that unfettered freedom to explore and discover yourself and what's always been inside of you, and it doesn't deliver? It doesn't deliver the happiness you expect it to.
Yeah. Well, I think the fundamental issue here is what Wendell Berry would call creatureliness, of a revolt against the idea of being a creature, which means that I either want to be a god so that I transcend limits, or I become a machine where I have no limits because I have no possibilities. Everything is programmed out for me. And so I think right now technology is giving people the illusion of being able to transcend and to transgress with almost limitless possibilities. But of course, nothing is limitless. So I think it does leave someone with the ultimate question of who am I in the dark, of that sense of guilt and of shame that we have present almost everywhere in society, and there's no way to get out of it from that by just being more of who I am. I can't escape my problem if my problem is who I am. And so we have to be able to address that and answer it.
Well, give us a little bit more, Tim, on how you would engage that with, as a parent or a preacher with a teenager. Like, how do you begin to get inside of that narrative to build them a bridge, though, toward the gospel?
Okay, so you say you want to be yourself. How do you figure that? What does that mean? So, well, the answer is I look inside and I see my deep feelings, and I should be able to, my dreams, and I should be able to, I should be able to realize those. And I would say, well, but here's a question. Some of your deep feelings you don't want to act on. Well, that's not true. I said, well, I usually would say, this is one illustration, 1,000 years ago, if you're a young man, you're an Anglo-Saxon warrior, you're walking around, Britain, and you look in your heart and you see this this strong feeling. It's called aggression, and when people get in your way, you just like killing them. So in that culture, shame and honor culture, warrior culture, you look at that and you say, that's me. That's me. I like that. Today, if you're a young man, you're walking around Orlando and you feel like that, you go to therapy, you go to anger management, or you go to jail. And you don't like that. You generally will not probably identify with that. So what I would say, one of the things I'd say is, look, basically, you think you're free because you're just looking your heart and doing. Basically, every culture tells you which feelings are truly you and which ones are not. So our culture tells you if you have any sexual desires, that's you. If you have aggression, that's not you. Well, that other culture said it was the other way around. And so I said, actually, you need to let the Bible help you sift your feelings. Otherwise, you're going to think you're free, but the culture is actually telling you who to be. Now, I've got a way of talking with teenagers about that makes them say, I hadn't thought of it like that. The other, of course, thing is that I would try to say your identity is in Jesus. And I want you to know that it sounds freeing to say, well, I'm going to be a dancer. But then you are a slave to the dance community and how they think of you. Or I want to go make money on Wall Street, then you're a slave to the stock market. I said, you're going to be a slave to something, but why give godlike power into the hands of human beings? And unless you find your identity in Christ, you are actually giving godlike power to non-God people. So that it's, as you can tell, that is something you have to talk about constantly, and especially with young people. Otherwise, you don't insulate them from what the culture is going to be telling them.
Well, Taylor's work has been significant to you. We were talking recently about how you've read The Secular Age, about 1,000 pages, dense philosophy, 4 times.
Yeah, I've worked through it 4 times.
Worked through it 4 times. Clearly, what he's describing is so significant in terms of this age we live in. But he's not the only person talking about these things. Before him, you had Robert Bella and Habits of the Heart, talking about many similar things, describing some of these trends as expressive individualism. The thing is, though, we don't have the luxury of looking outside of the church and seeing these things. Expressive individualism is alive and well inside the church. Where do you see that?
Well, that's right. And I mean, one of the things that happens is sometimes in the church we assume that the things that are most dangerous are the things that are the most hotly debated. Yeah. So whatever's being debated on Facebook, I come in with a Christian worldview perspective of that. When in reality, the most dangerous things are the things we're not arguing about because we don't even think to question them at all. And that it's also, I think, a danger to assume that these things are a problem with not only with the world, but also with the less discipled people within the congregation, without recognizing these things have changed all of us in some ways or other. And if we don't know how that is, we're just not aware of it. But yeah, I mean, the way people hear what we're saying, I think part of that has to do with some cultural factors that even are apart from these things. So mobility, for instance. There's a natural response for a teenager to try to define himself or herself against parents. I'm not them, I'm someone else. But in many other cultures in the world, there are other people there that they can identify with and still see themselves as part of a tribe, of a village, of a family. Now, it's often me over against my parents and then the world outside there. And so if the church isn't able to come in and provide an alternative definition of who we are, when you think of we, then I think that's when we're going to be in dangerous territory.
At the risk of saying something that'll get me in a lot of trouble, I wonder if expressive individualism helps to explain some of the attractiveness to Reformed theology for precisely the reason you defined right there, as a way of separating yourself from what you inherited. Question. And I've wondered, these people like myself, who didn't grow up that way, now having children, what we expect of our own children growing up in a world of expressive individualism. We don't want them to go running after some other kind of church or some other kind of theology because we think this is correct. And yet, because we're so steeped in expressive individualism, that's simply the expectation that I have to grow up and throw off the shackles, move away from home. I'm a failure if I've stayed home.
Strike my own course.
Strike my own course.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, most of what I think is happening with kind of the revival of Reformed theology and Reformed-ish theology is genuine, getting back to the roots, finding out what. But there is a kind of person who differentiates himself against his home church, his home pastor, his parents. I'm more educated than you are, I'm more confessional than you are. And then also the sort of person who will see this as a refuge from all the bad things that they encountered. So, well, we had contentious business meetings in my home church, but if we have elders, we won't have that.
Right.
And we had carnality, but if we have a robust confession of faith, we won't have that. And if that's the motivation, it is going to lead to this perpetual search. And well, maybe it's Rome, or maybe it's Pentecostalism, or maybe it's something else that leaves us without an anchor, without a home.
And in this secular age, in this age of authenticity, of expressive individualism, then, in addition to what you've described, Tim, as just sort of throwing them for a loop by introducing other cultural narratives to at least help them to reflect on, oh, maybe I haven't figured this all out. I shouldn't assume everything that I'm just imbibing from this culture. How do we specifically, though, talk about sin and judgment? Of course, you did a little bit talking there about idolatry. That's one of the ways we do it. You'll be a slave to whatever you've made your identity. Are there other ways to talk about sin and judgment to help people to get to that gospel deliverance from Christ in this age?
Oh, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You're talking about with a secular person. You're trying to. Well, you either the slavery thing is fair because you're using their narrative against them.
Right.
In other words, if they're that hard, they're that horrified at being anything but free, it's right to say, unless you're a slave to God, you won't be free. And just throw that out there as a thesis, and then when they look at you in horror, say, "Now I'm going to try to show you how that's the case." Yeah. That's very Augustinian, and in a way, somebody might say, "Well, shouldn't you be saying that sin is actually rebellion and is offense to a holy God? It's not just slavery." Yes, I do actually think, though, that it's also slavery. And since I know that will get their attention, I very often will go there first, and then turn around. But you can also use a term like this. I could say, I'll just give you one quick example. I would say, imagine a young man who he was the only son. His mother is a single woman, and she worked her fingers to the bone to raise enough money to send him to college. And so she puts him through college. And when he goes off to college, she says, "I want you to be a good man who you care for other people, you work hard, you always tell the truth." And so he graduates from college, and he goes off and he lives a good life. He always tells the truth. He takes care of others and that sort, but he never calls her. Never goes to see her. Maybe a Christmas card. That's it. Would that be okay? He's living the life that she wants him to live, right? Would that be okay? No, of course that'd be terrible, because he owes her a relationship. So I would say, people are always saying to me, "I'm a good person just because I don't believe in God." What is that? Why would God send me to hell forever? The answer is, it's horrible that you don't. If he exists and he gives you everything, then the fact that you're not relating to him is offensive. It's wrong. It's terrible. It's horrible. There's a lot of ways of getting at with secular people, to giving them an understanding of sin that they say, "Oh, I get it." Mm-hmm. So one way is the freedom thing. One way is the relationship. But using an example of that, where if you owe God what you do owe him, then you owe him a relationship, and for just living a good life is not enough. So there's a lot of ways of undermining the secular narratives.
Yeah.